I'm convinced that parachute cord, or paracord as we know it, is one of the most versatile materials out there. We all know you can craft bracelets with it, but of course you can make wallets and even pouches with it. Just as a painter works with oils, you can create a masterpiece just with a handful of colors. But what you can also do is modify and accentuate the tools and gear that you have, because paracord is just that freaking awesome. So join me as we're going to drop leg like it's hot with this paracord knife sheath. I'm sorry, that doesn't even make any sense. Anyhow, I have a problem, and that problem is that when this fixed blade knife is on my belt line, it just sits a little too high, which makes it hard to unsheath, and it also just digs into your side. Solution: I have paracord. So a knife is a tool, and paracord can also be seen as a tool. So if you combine a tool with a tool, you've now made a super tool. And what I want to demonstrate is how paracord can be used to enhance your gear in a way that just goes beyond personalizing it. Now, I've personally looked into different methods of fixed blade carry using paracord, clearly, but this method is new to me and perhaps you. So what a lot of bushcrafters and people that love the outdoors do is, when it comes to large fixed blade carry, it's what's called a dangler, and we can achieve that using some Solomon knots. And I will go on record saying that the Solomon knot is one of the most versatile and useful knots you can master as a paracordist. I think that's a real word. So using said Solomon knots, we can start the first level of this modification. Now this should work with most of these sort of kydex or plastic pancake style sheaths, as long as you have some holes around the sides. The key here is that you start your Solomon knots by going over 4 of the core strands that form the belt loop, and as we approach the belt, we split off to 2. And the trickiest part here is making both loops as close to the same length and dimensions as possible, but just double check your length before you weave too far with the Solomon knots. But the goal here was to create these dangler belt loops that will allow the long handle of the knife to sit well below the belt line so that it's easier to unsheath. Now that being said, I think it could have made my dangler hang a bit lower here. That sounds kind of weird, but anyways, feel free to adjust this to your liking based on the size of your knife and arm length. Now another quick note here is that I decided not to continue the Solomon knots around the back of the belt loop so that it would be a bit thinner and have less material between my belt and my hip. And you may also have to play with the size of the belt loop here so that it fits yours. Make sure it isn't too loose or too tight. So to quickly recap, paracord attaches to the sheath via a cow hitch. The cords form 2 bites, and Solomon knots are tied over all 4 core strands to form the dangler belt loop. And once you need to start forming the belt loop, you branch off and weave over the 2 middle core strands to the very middle of the bites. You could go all the way around with a bit of extra paracord, but again, I didn't for comfort. And after finishing the first belt loop, I would suggest testing the belt loop on your actual hip as you wear it, just to double check and make sure you have a comfortable length and that works best for you. And if the first loop is how you want it, you can go ahead and create a second one on the other side. And as you can see, just using a bit of paracord, we've easily created a couple of dangler belt loops for this particular knife. Now, if you wanted to keep things simple, you could actually stop here. But we can take this further because I don't really like how these 2 loops are kind of like bunny ears. And we're going to, of course, add the drop leg part. So going back to the Solomon knot, well, we can create a retention loop for our leg. Well, I'm creating one for my leg, and you can create one for yours as well, as we don't have the same leg. That would be weird. Now, once again, we have a problem. We need to create a leg retention loop that can fit your leg, or more specifically your thigh, comfortably. Now, I want to be able to adjust it for comfort and also more or less tension depending on my situation. I'm going to show you a lazy man's version for this part as a bonus at the end of the video, so be sure to stick around for that, but here's the fancy way. Using the holes near the tip of the sheath, we're going to essentially create a large Solomon knot bracelet that can be buckled around the leg, but that is with the Mad Max adjustable method. This first piece is the adjuster, and we're actually going to cut this piece in half and then tie a double snake knot. You could tie a diamond knot, but we'll make things easy. And it's also where we'll incorporate our cord lock. And if you don't have a cord lock on hand, you can always tie a small section of cobra knots to make a cord lock. It just might be harder to adjust as you can't adjust the tension. but about half a foot of paracord should do it, and you can even gut the paracord for a smaller profile improvised cord lock. Small detail here, but I like to pass one cord through the back of the buckle and one through the front. I find this makes the Solomon knots sit more nicely and aesthetically against the buckle. Then we're going to attach this to one side of the buckle, again using Solomon knots to create the part of the leg strap. That adjuster section is then going to be connected to the knife sheath via the next section of knots, and in this case, the second paracord strand is attached to the sheath, and then the running ends are connected to the adjustable section. Hope that's not too confusing. And in case you weren't aware, I keep calling this method the Mad Max method because it was Tom Hardy who popularized this style of bracelet clasp or closure method when he wore a paracord bracelet using this style in the movie Mad Max Fury Road. After that, this adjuster section is connected to the sheath via a second section of Solomon knots. And when you're tying this, you'll have to make sure there's a decent amount of tension around the core strands of the first to form the Mad Max adjuster. Another interesting note is that Tom Hardy did in fact make the paracord bracelet he wore in Fury Road, but he didn't exactly come up with the method himself. Rather, he learned it from a personal friend of his who is in the military that gifted Tom his very first bracelet. Now, if you look closely here, the cords from the second section pass through the middle of the core strands of the adjuster. They loop back around as you start tying the Solomon knots. The tension here is important because it's necessary for the size of the leg loop to be able to be adjusted. That being said, the cord lock will add some tension to that, and this section will get woven all the way to the sheath. Now, an important note about sizing. What I've done is that when I have the adjuster to the most open position, it fits me comfortably with a bit of slack. And if I need the leg loop to be extra tight, I then close it up and secure it with my cord lock. Also, one thing I didn't take into account was the thickness of my phone when it's in my pocket, as well as the position of the leg strap. So I'll have to remove my phone from that pocket or have the sheath sit even lower with longer belt loops. Now, the third longest section of knots is what will go behind your leg, and this is also connected to the sheath, and it will come to the front where it will be attached to the other side of the buckle. So just to sum it up for clarity, short Mad Max adjuster section in front that's connected to one buckle, second section next to it attached to the sheath, and the third section is attached to the second buckle and sheath. Now, before you snip and melt your excess cords, I would suggest checking everything for sizing so that you're happy with the setup and location of the buckle. Oh, and I mentioned it before, I don't really like how the two belt loops are kind of separate like bunny ears, so I'm joining mine with another section of knots. You don't have to do this, but I kind of like the look of it better. This joining section does, however, prevent the two dangler loops from moving around as much, as it does help them stay in line with each other. I think this might also help the entire setup feel a bit less flimsy or floppy while it's on your hip. Now, if you don't make this connecting section, the belt loops might move around a bit more, but again, that might not be a bad thing if you want to be able to shift the straps around or have them spread out a bit more. Feel free to customize this as needed, as you'll already be doing that, unless you have the exact same knife as me. Now, just because I've shown you how to make this doesn't mean you can go, because I have some notes to share about actually using something like this, as I'm not done yapping my Japanese. Now, as for unsheathing your knife, I did mention that I could have made this hang a bit lower, but after wearing this drop leg sheath around my apartment and walking around acting like I'm gonna actually do something and touch grass, I've come up with this technique. So you can just grab the knife from the sheath in the same grip as you would. So I did notice that I do have to still cock my elbow back a bit, which isn't super comfortable. But to remedy that, you can either push the butt end of the knife back and angle it slightly, as the paracord is flexible, you can draw that way. Or what I've found is that you can actually rotate your wrist inwards and grab the knife. And after you've unsheathed it, you'll just very slightly readjust your grip so that it's sitting in the proper orientation in your hand. It's not really like that thing cowboys do when the butt end of the gun is facing forward, but it's kind of like a slightly less rotated version of that. I know this seems complicated, but even with a few practice draws, it feels very natural and comfortable. So that's how I would do it. Oh, and as for the lazy man's version of the leg retention loop, you can just use a single piece of paracord to make that loop and then secure it with a stopper knot and cord lock. But the only thing here is that when it comes to putting the sheath on and off, you'll have to put your leg through the loop and then attach it to your belt, or maybe even tie it on each time.